capitalist cities chased profit, socialist cities promised equality, but fascist cities, they weren't built for comfort or fairness. They were built as theaters of power. Here, the streets weren't for commuting, they were for marching. Squares weren't for markets, they were for rallies. Buildings weren't for function, they were for intimidation. From Mussolini's Rome to Hitler's Berlin, Franco's Madrid, Salazar's Lisbon, militarist Tokyo, and even authoritarian echoes in South America, fascist regimes redesigned cities to stage myths, parades, and obedience. This is the story of fascist cities, the theater of power. Benito Mussolini styled himself as the heir to Caesar. For him, Rome wasn't just a capital, it was propaganda shaped into stone. His most famous intervention was the Via dei Fori Imperiali. In the 1930s, Mussolini ordered a wide boulevard slashed straight through the heart of Rome, bulldozing medieval neighborhoods and uprooting thousands of residents. The road linked Piazza Venezia, his political stage, to the Colosseum. Why? So we could march down it like a new Caesar. Fascism didn't just use history, it edited it. Medieval Rome was erased to glorify Imperial Rome. But Mussolini wasn't content with reworking the past, he wanted to invent a fascist future. That future was the EU Art District, which is Esposizione Universale Roma. Planned for a 1942 World Fair, it showcased rationalized classicism, stripped-down Roman arches, cube-like monuments, and vast piazzas. The Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana, or Square Colosseum, became its icon, endless arches stacked like a fascist Excel spreadsheet. And it wasn't just about show. Everyday Roman life was reshaped. Piazzas hosted mandatory rallies. Walls carried fascist posters. Radio loudspeakers broadcast propaganda into public spaces. The entire urban environment became a stage where citizens played their part as extras in Mussolini's performance. Imagine your morning commute constantly interrupted by a dictator rehearsing his victory parade. If Mussolini staged Rome, Hitler wanted to rewrite Berlin entirely. His dream was Germania, a capital that would dwarf every city in history. Designed by Albert Speer, Germania was a 2-mile-long axis of intimidation. At one end, a triumphal arch, 3 times the size of Paris's Arc de Triomphe. At the other, Volkshalle, a domed hall so large St. Peter's Basilica could fit inside like a child's toy. Its interior dome was so tall that clouds and condensation would have formed inside during rallies. These weren't buildings, they were intimidation devices. Then came Nuremberg. Every September, the city hosted massive rallies where hundreds of thousands marched in choreographed formations. The Zeppelin field had seating for 200,000. The Cathedral of Light used 130 searchlights to create vertical beams around the arena, forming an ethereal columned hall of light. It was urban design as psychological manipulation, making ordinary citizens feel small, engulfed in a spectacle. Daily life in Nazi Germany reflected this imbalance. Housing shortages plunged Berlin, while resources poured into colossal rallies grounds and monuments. Speer's office built prestige projects, not apartments. The message was clear. The city wasn't for the people, but for the performance of power. After Spain's brutal civil war, Francisco Franco sought to immortalize his regime in stone. The result was the Valle de los Caídos, or Valley of the Fallen, a massive basilica and mausoleum carved into a mountain. Above it stood the world's tallest memorial cross, 150 meters high. Built partly with forced labor from political prisoners, it became both monument and tomb. Franco was buried there until 2019. Madrid itself was reshaped with grand boulevards and plazas for parades. Franco's regime fused Catholic monumentalism with fascist symbolism, crosses and saints alongside eagles and soldiers. Urban life mirrored this ideology. Religious festivals and military parades blurred into the same public rituals. The city was a stage not for debate, but for devotion. Neighboring Portugal, under Antonio Salazar's Estado Novo, also adopted authoritarian urbanism. Lisbon became a showcase of modest monumentalism, wide avenues, state pavilions, and rationalized housing states. Classical styles were simplified, made orderly, and deployed as symbols of authority. The regime also used public fairs and expositions to project control, staging events in specially designed districts. Portugal's authoritarian planning wasn't as extravagant as Germania, but it followed the same script: order, hierarchy, and obedience embedded in urban form. Subscribe, because once you have seen cities as theater of obedience, you'll want to see how cities became theaters of democracy. In Asia, militarist Japan mirrored fascist planning logic. In Tokyo, avenues radiated from the imperial palace. They weren't just traffic routes, they were symbolic passes for parades connecting the emperor to his people. Military positions dominated these spaces in the 1930s. But the clearest authoritarian showcase was in Manchukuo, Japan's puppet state in northeast China. Its capital, Changchun, was rebuilt as a model authoritarian city. Monumental boulevards, government plazas, and symmetrical state districts. Changchun fused imperial Japanese symbols with fascist-style monumentalism, proving authoritarian urbanism was a global export. Daily life reflected control. Citizens were expected to perform loyalty through attendance at rallies and festivals. Public space was surveillance space. Even in South America, echoes of fascist urbanism appeared. In Buenos Aires, the Avenida Nueve de Julio, the world's widest avenue, became a stage for military parades and authoritarian rallies under Juan Perón and later regimes. Its very scale embodied centralized authority. In Brazil, the Vargas dictatorship promoted monumental modernization, with São Paulo's new avenues and Rio's state complexes serving as stages for political performance. While not strictly fascist, these authoritarian experiments borrowed the same urban language: wide boulevards, mass plazas, and state-centered architecture. What was it like to live inside fascist cities? Unlike socialist cities, which invented in worker housing, fascist cities neglected the everyday. Housing shortages were common. Public funds went into monuments and rallies, not apartments or parks. Citizens were conscripted into rituals. Streets became parade grounds. Attendance at rallies wasn't optional. Architecture and planning weren't neutral. They were coercive. Imagine living in a city where your biggest weekend event isn't football. It's lining up to salute a dictator. The result? Urban life drained of spontaneity. Public spaces designed not for participation, but for obedience. Across cases, fascist cities followed the same blueprint. First, monumentality. Colossal buildings designed to awe and intimidate. Second, axial boulevards. Long straight lines for parades and military control. Third, appropriated history. Rome's empire, Catholic grandeur, Imperial Japan, classical echoes. Fourth, the city as theater. Every street a stage, every plaza and auditorium. Where capitalist cities were markets and socialist cities were plans, fascist cities were performance. So what became of these authoritarian spaces? Rome's Via dei Fori Imperiali is now a tourist road lined with traffic. Mussolini's parade route turned everyday street. EU's Square Colosseum is rebranded as a luxury corporate HQ. Berlin's rally grounds are now sports and concert venues. Their fascist past both remembered and repurposed. Franco's Valle of the Fallen remains controversial. His body was exhumed in 2019, but the monument still looms. Tokyo's imperial boulevards still radiate from the palace, now used for everyday commutes. Buenos Aires' Avenida Nueve de Julio is a traffic artery, its authoritarian symbolism overwritten by urban chaos. These sites prove that architecture outlives ideology, but it also carries memory, contested, uncomfortable, yet unavoidable. But fascism wasn't the only ideology shaping the 20th century. At the very same time, a counter-tradition persisted: democracy. Where fascist plazas staged obedience, democratic plazas invited protest. Where authoritarian boulevards channeled parades, democratic squares hosted debates. From Athens' Agora to Washington's Mall, from Paris to Hong Kong, democratic cities built places not for the leader, but for the people. That's our next stop. Episode 6: Democratic Cities, Plazas and Participation.